ESVCLP is what incentivizes funds to invest in Australia.
Yeah, so that is correct. So that's probably a good point to touch on and actually go more in depth with. So with ESVCLP, for us to be a fund that gets that benefit, we have to invest 80% of our capital into businesses that are based in Australia for the year of the investment. And so if we're investing in companies that are based over in the US and that makes up more than 20% of our investments, we actually don't get that incentive. So different when companies are based here and then they eventually move over, that's fine. Again, if you're investing in them while they're Australian. But for new investments that we're making, we're actively looking to do those primarily companies based in Australia for about 80%.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Fundraising Insiders podcast, the podcast where we put whatever is behind the check and we put it inside the deck. Today, I'll be talking with a calmer, deeper, maybe soothing voice for some of you because it's a bit tired, but we will still bring in this energy we always have, especially with a guest like Josh, who will bring some of his energy, maybe a balance a bit mine as well from the energy down under. Josh is coming to us from Australia, a very special ecosystem, and that's going to be one of the big topics of today's episode. To get a first look is the first time we tackle that geography on the podcast. And thank you, Josh, for bringing your expertise, your experience about that. It will be done in a very local way, with the right, so you have the right fashion, you have the right accent, we'll hear very soon, and hopefully give us an idea of how is it that can founders thrive in this ecosystem or start in this ecosystem, transfer there, anything. But before that, tell us, who are you, where you come from, what's your background, and how you got to do all of this, because you went through so many hats before becoming an investor, many founder hats. And that's going to be one of the interesting points. How do you go from founder to investor? And it feels like, without teasing too much, in your career, you have founder, a job, founder, job, founder, job. And there's always something that brings you back to it. And for now, you're wearing the investor hat, but we'll hear more about it when you tell us all about it. So Josh, thank you for joining us, and please introduce yourself.
Thanks for the kind introduction. G'day, mate, to all of the non-Australians. I'm sure they all wanted to hear about it. And yeah, thank you for the kind words. So it's a pleasure to be here. So from my background, done a whole bunch of different things. I started working as soon as I was legally allowed to. So in Australia at the time, it was 14 and 9 months. I think really I probably started working a little bit before that. And so the journey's always been a bit of a mix. So my first real foray into the founder startup ecosystem was working with a few of my friends on a fashion business. So it was meant to be fashion AR. Goal was it would kind of build out what came in the later stages of like the NFT side of things, where there was, if you had access to a certain NFT, you got access to membership clubs. We were doing a similar thing years before that was kind of around. That was looking at if there was a logo embedded into a t-shirt, it gives you access to events. It would become kind of an extended out club, those types of things.
Gotcha.
Like, had all the fun with it. I am not a fashionable man. I had no right to play in the fashion space. We had, thankfully, some friends that were able to help us out and were able to get us stocked across a whole bunch of different stores. We had professional athletes. Things ended up kind of blowing up just from internal, probably mismanagement from us, not in a unethical way, just in we were teenagers who had no idea what we were doing and didn't know how to run a business. So ended up kind of stepping away from that one. Had then gone in and worked across again a bunch of different jobs. I was a signwriter and tradie for a little while. I was a laborer. I worked in security as a bouncer, worked as a bartender, worked as a barista, worked as a restaurant back of house person. So I've done a lot of things. Went and worked for government. So worked for the water utility provider here. Did a little bit of entrepreneurship. So helping build out systems internally, as well as kind of a whole bunch of things from call center work to claims to repairs and emergencies. Then jumped back in for the founder side. So in Melbourne, in Australia, we had quite strict lockdown rules. So during the COVID pandemic, I was still at university. We were effectively all locked inside. We could only go 5Ks outside the radius of our house, only allowed outside for I think an hour or two a day. So it was pretty intense. And the struggle then came that a lot of local businesses were getting crushed because they had not prepared for this. So if you think about your butchers, your bakers, your grocery stores, they had, in many cases, no click and collect. They didn't have more than just a website that said their address and come and have a look. And so they were just getting absolutely slaughtered. At about this time as well, Milk Run was starting to build up, which was a guerrilla style grocery delivery service by bike. And then the kind of duopoly of Coles and Woolworths, the two largest chains, they were cleaning up because they had the ability to adjust. They were able to build out their stores and their systems to allow click and collect and delivery. And so we saw a bit of a gap. I was working with a few friends of mine, and we found that there was effectively a gap in the system for those stores where they were getting left behind. No one had really built anything to help them. And so we built a system that was designed to effectively enable them to do one-stop click and collect. So plug in, whether it was an Excel spreadsheet, whether it was an inventory management system, whatever they were using to track what they had in stock. They could plug it into an app that had kind of a Uber Eats style interface. It was meant to be their kind of local town square. And then they would be able to automatically update their stock so that people could go in, place orders through the app, and then have it all be stocked by the staff in store so they could kind of keep afloat. And got a lot of traction with that, had a lot of interest. Again, it was probably more down to us not being prepared to be able to build a business and run it at that size and scale, as well as the financial runway it takes to build something, especially during lockdown. So we ended up not being able to get it fully off the ground, but still think it's a great business and learned a lot in that process. And then done a whole bunch of stuff in the nonprofit space. So whether that's kind of starting my own nonprofits, whether that is helping build systems for existing ones, always been drawn to that through my mum, who started her own nonprofit and foundation and dedicated her life to helping people. She's an amazing woman. And so I learned a lot from her in that space. And I think that there is a lot that can be done when you understand a problem space well, and also have the technical ability, which I would say I very barely do, to be able to build and kind of help address some of those gaps. So did a little bit in the food relief space, currently working on one in effectively helping re-educate the employees at charities to give them these skills for automation and AI. And then also to their community. So specifically focusing on migrant and culturally and linguistically diverse women, basically helping up and reskill them to allow them, when they are inevitably affected by what is coming in the tidal wave of job losses that people are predicting with AI, they're likely to be the first group to be affected and most heavily. So we want to help reskill them and then help them find placements into employers that will respect and appreciate the skills that we can try and help them build.
Gotcha. Before we move to the investment part of your career, I think it's very interesting. Every time there's something that you would point out as a failure because we couldn't take it off the ground, or we were too young and things didn't work out. But every time the concluding words you use is, it was an interesting adventure and I learned a lot of things. And that's the essence of being an entrepreneur, is being able to fail, but being able to digest the failures. So before moving forward, I'd like to get maybe some of the learnings, the key learnings of all of these adventures, the more and the less successful ones. What are the main things that you brought on to your investor career? What is it that all of those entrepreneurial experiences that made you a better investor, or prepared you to be an investor with maybe a kinder heart, of course, because when you're an ex-founder, you understand founders, but also a sharper eye for certain details that traditional financial background type investors wouldn't necessarily have?
Yeah, look, I think it's a great question. I think the biggest learning is probably that it is really hard. And I think there is a level of working in an investment role that you can be in an ivory tower a little bit and go, oh, why don't you do this? Why don't you do this? Why didn't you think of this? When you're not on the ground actually getting your hands dirty building something, you don't appreciate how many things you are juggling, how complex it is, keeping on top of technology, keeping on top of customer needs. There is a million and one different things flying at you from every direction. And I think it is very easy from the outside to go, oh, well, I can't believe they missed X, Y, Z. Oh, they should have done this. It's such a different world when you're actually in it. And I think it gave me an appreciation for the amount of work and effort that founders are putting into building these businesses. And, even if I disagree with what they're doing, I think there's a better way. Like, they are probably someone who has dedicated more hours of their life into this problem in this space than I've had, waiting hours in the last couple of months. So I think it's just being appreciative of what goes into these businesses and the amount of effort. I think other learnings for me have been understanding who are the right types of people to work with. So I worked with friends largely. And I think in many cases, it was more being excited to get to work with my friends than it was about, okay, what's the right set of skills? What's the right combination of people?
Gotcha.
Are these people that I like on a personal level, as opposed to are these people that I want to build a business with? I think they can be very different things. And so I think for me, my lessons were, okay, if I was ever going to go out and do the founder journey again, which who knows, maybe one day, then it would be more about, okay, who is a person that I could effectively marry? Who would I be willing to go into the next 10 to 20 years of my life, seeing this person basically every day, knowing that we can handle conflict together, knowing that we can, build something out that is going to outlast us, hopefully, in the dream scenarios. And being also aware that if things go well, this is someone who will be accountable for a lot of people. Do you have trust that they can manage teams? Do you believe that you can see what's coming and adjust? And I think there's just so many elements as well that come down to at the core, the two co-founders or three co-founders or single founder or however you kind of set the business up, like that core team is what drives the business for such a long time beyond just the early days, that it really is essential to get that pairing and that mix right. And then the other thing would probably be around just understanding when you should be focusing on building and when you should be focusing on validating. There are so many times that I've started building something because I've gotten excited about a problem that I've seen, and I've got about halfway through a build, spent months working on it, and then realized that I had yet to speak to a single real customer. Then you go out in the market and you speak to the customers and they go, yeah, that is a problem, not one I pay to fix. And all of a sudden I'm left with half of a very useful, but ultimately impossible to profit off of business that is not worth the months that I've spent on it. So I think there's also some lessons for me that I've tried to push forward to other founders of don't just build, also validate. You don't necessarily need to go out and start selling something that doesn't exist, but you need to know that there is a market, that you're solving a real problem. Like build to solve a problem. Don't build something and then try and jam that into whatever problem you can find that justifies what you built, which happens so much more than I was expecting it to. And I can say that I've definitely been that person as well.
It's something that you mentioned earlier where there was the COVID, you saw a gap, and with that delivery business or quick pick up and collect, it was identifying the gap and starting from the gap. Not starting from an idea, it's starting from the gap, and you derive the idea from it. So I think this is a very interesting point. And it goes to, I mean, the name of the mother company of this podcast is Pitch Deck Creator. And of course, in a pitch deck or in any kind of presentation, even in just an elevator chat, what do you start with? It's always the problem. You start with the problem, start with the gap, and then you go to the solutions. I think it's really something that sounds easy. And yet again, maybe because of that tunnel vision when you're a founder, you're mentioning earlier, you can be very into, you're putting out so many fires at the same time that you sometimes forget to focus on the essential, the problem, the solution, the customer, in that specific order. And I'm really glad we tackled this in the first 10 minutes or so of the episode, because it's really so central, and sometimes it's hard to focus on the basics. It feels like of what you just said, it's a lot of the essentials of the basics. And unfortunately, I don't think I will ever be able to get enough episodes, enough conversations to really hammer this down in founders' mind. And it's the kind of thing that you have to live through it to understand it. It's one of those very empirical kind of learnings. But if we have amazing people like you that can warn or prepare the ground or lay down the foundations to avoid making some of those mistakes, then that's the whole function of the podcast. So thank you for that. I also really like what you said about appreciating how hard something is, this ivory tower kind of principle. Now, you can't really go and tell founders, oh, you didn't see this, so that's wrong, or you should do things this way, blah, blah. But how do you take those external standpoint? That ivory tower is, yes, made of ivory, which has pros and cons, but the tower aspect is an interesting one because it means you have a higher overview point about what's happening in the company, which gives you a point of view that founders don't necessarily have. How do you functionalize, how do you operationalize those realizations, those observations to support a portfolio? You can't just barge in and say, that's trash, that's trash, that's trash. You should have looked at that. And the founder's going to tell you, mate, there's fire everywhere around me. Just give me time. So how do you manage the situation to maybe orientate toward the right things? Maybe also, I don't know how to say this, but cheer up the founder that some of the fires around them are not as important or not as threatening as they think they are. They can step back about certain things, focus on the more dangerous ones that maybe haven't seen the warm embers that are going to be a fire soon, but you need to solve them now. So how do you do that as an investor?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it varies a little bit depending on the stage, but one thing that I've kind of learned recently, I used to hate seeing VCs that didn't come from a founder background posting on things like LinkedIn where they would say, founders should do this, founders need to do this. And it's like, what would you know? You've never been there, you've never done it. But then I came to a bit of a realization, especially at the time that I've had at Black Nova, which is, yes, there is always going to be a gap between a VC and a founder who hasn't, had that experience. But I think there is also a level of information that you get as a VC that is probably my favorite part of the job, which is you're just spending your entire day learning. You are meeting amazing people. You're meeting founders that have incredible perspectives. You're meeting experts in their field, and they are teaching you about their businesses and about their markets and about what they're playing in. And I think that there is so much that you get from that you can share back, that I've now swayed a little bit away from my hardline VCs should shut up and do their job and stop posting, and more to, okay, I think there is actually value in what the average VC has to say, because there is so many things that we see and hear and learn that we could be passing on and probably don't to the extent that we should. Like, I think you have an aggregation of, I wouldn't even know how many pitches. I would say I've probably met with hundreds of founders in the last year, maybe more. I would have seen thousands of pitch decks. All of those data points carry some value, whether it is in thematics, whether it's market trends, whether it's understanding, hey, you're not actually that unique in your feature set. There are other people that are doing this, because there is a information asymmetry, which is we have visibility of thousands of businesses that are coming to us. The founders probably don't. Like, they will have a level of research that they can do, but a lot of this information isn't always public. And there's obviously a fine line drawn of, I'm not going to share something that was shared with me confidence by a founder that's pitching to us. There's a level of respect that I think you need to have, regardless of NDAs or anything else. It is just about having the respect of the founder of, if they've come to you to pitch their business, you should not be sharing that out externally for any reason other than to introduce them to other investors with their permission or whatever else it might be. You shouldn't be sharing those secrets, including if there's a conflict. Like, there's been times where someone's pitched a business very similar to something we've invested in. I will tell the founder, hey, look, I think that this is too close to something we've looked at. I don't feel comfortable proceeding any further, because I don't want you to be getting the information that I might forget came from you and then share it in a call and not realize that I've just disclosed. So I think there's also that. But there is a lot of information that we can share that is incredibly valuable in terms of go-to-market trends, approaches, other lessons that I think we can pass on. And so I think it's a mix of understanding what is appropriate to share and what you can give value to, and also knowing, if I'm talking to a deep tech founder, I am not going to have any value to add to them in their product form or in, oh, you should be using these types of tests and systems, because I just don't know enough about their space to have that kind of commentary. But in commercialization pathways, in different corporates that I know for a fact are more than willing to work as a pilot customer, there's a lot of information that I would have that could still be useful. It's about knowing where to offer support and advice, and it should be advice, not orders, and where to sit back and shut up and respect that they know more than you about their space that they're an expert in.
Would you consider this being one of the selection criteria when, I know it's a luxury for a founder to be able to select their investors, but if they do, is that something that they should be on the lookout for, the kind of relation they have early on before even signing any documents or even presenting such things as term sheets, but kind of testing the investor about, hey, how are you going to help us? How into the business are you going to get?
100%. I think it's probably the most important criteria, beyond whether or not the investor actually has money to invest, which is obviously a necessary piece of the transaction that shockingly comes up a lot, and we could talk about that later. But
always ask, do you have money to invest? Yes or no? If no, we'll raise a fund next year. I need money now. Yeah. Good one.
So that's one question. But I think, like, arguably as important, if not more important, is understanding what the investor actually brings to the table. Like, if they are just a check and that's all you need, fine. But there are so many investors out there that are genuine value adds, whether it is because they've invested in businesses that they can connect you with in their portfolio, whether it is because they have unique connections or experience that they can bring. Black Nova, we're set up as an operator fund. So everyone on the team has either been an operator or a founder. We have 26 venture partners at the moment, each of which is either a niche expert or an exited founder, with exits ranging up to kind of the billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar valuations. We lean in pretty hard. When we're investing in a company, we will pair them with a coach. So one of our venture partners will work with them on an ongoing basis. They can come to us whenever they have a problem. And if we can't solve it, we'll try and find someone who can, whether that is, hey, we can't figure out how to price our products, we're struggling, we have a pricing expert. If it's, we're really struggling to figure out go-to-market for this vertical, this wedge, we have go-to-market experts that we'll bring in. All of this is something that we're paying for. So our carry, we are distributing that out to our venture partners as an incentive. And also largely investors in the fund. So they've got skin in the game to be kind of contributing and making the portfolio perform better, because they get return off the back of it for their own investments. But also, like, they care. They've done it before. They've been there. They have that founder mentality. They want to help. They want to be involved in the ecosystem and give back now that they've kind of had their own success. And I think that that's one of the things that I love the most about this fund. So the reasons I work here and not anywhere else is because we actually do lean in and help a lot. I think that that is less common in Australia, to be transparent. We're not a market that's as developed, but I think if you look at the US, there's a number of funds that operate more like that, where it is about equity founders coming in hands-on, actually trying to help their
Right.
portfolio. And it pays dividends. Like, one, performance, companies will perform better if they have more help. And I say that with the asterisk of well-positioned help that is asked for and wanted, not forced, because that's kind of the other side of the coin, which is there are also investors who will believe that they are right and should have a say and will push their way in. And, if they're getting board seats, if they have enough shares, if they have some kind of controlling interest, then they can enforce decisions that you probably don't want them to, coming from a position of someone who is not necessarily always operating the founder's best interests. So there's a lot
Been
of
there.
complexity to that relationship. Well, yeah, you know as well as anyone.
It has happened to me, and yet that's why I also put an asterisk in if the founders have the luxury to be able to choose their investor. And it's kind of that hard balance. Unfortunately, there's not much to do there apart from showing that you know the game. I think it's a very important thing is, as a founder, showing to your investors that you know the game without being condescending about it, but showing that you know the game, that you know how it works. It's also one of the big missions of this podcast in educating founders and, hey, this is where the money comes from. This is how it works. I think it creates a much healthier relationship. As you said, for a co-founder, it's someone you want to marry for 10, 20 years. The same should go for an investor, someone that's going to be in your own boots as well. So showing that you care about it, showing that you want to know about them, that you know a little bit how it works, it creates a healthier relation. So we also talked about the build it and validate. I think you made a very strong point about this. You also had a point on founding again. It feels like it's still in the back of your mind. You're talking about it as if it's something coming soon. I want to throw just a little curveball here. Would you say how should I put this? How many years do you see yourself being an investor before something, the founder fly stings you again?
Yeah, look, it's a fair question. It's something that I've kind of grappled with myself. I, in transparency, originally wasn't planning on being a VC for that long. I kind of looked at it as a place where I could learn a bit, go in, learn what I need to learn, build some networks, and then jump out and go back founder side. I've actually recently changed my mind, having worked specifically here. I feel like it sounds like I'm doing an ad for Black Nova, which is not the case. It's just genuinely my experience of they have been amazing to work with. So I very much get to build every day. So my role is kind of 50-50 of investments and operations. And in operations, that includes building software, AI automation, building agents. Like, I've gotten to build recently a product for us internally, which is replacing half of the software that we're paying for. And I think for me, the founder journey was as much about the problem solving and getting to get my hands dirty and build as it is the sales, the interacting with people and that journey. And I kind of get both of those buckets filled at Black Nova in this role that I've kind of managed to cobble together with a few different roles plugged into one. And so I think for me, I'm getting everything that I need in that. And look, there will probably come a time one day where it goes, no, I found a problem that I care about enough that I need to solve it. I need that to be my focus. But I think right now, if I was to go and become a founder, it would be for the sake of being a founder, which I think is the wrong reason to do it, as opposed to I found a problem that I want to solve and I'll spend the next decade fixing this problem. And I think that's probably one of the biggest, we can kind of talk about as well, problems that I've found is there's a lot of founders who want to be a founder, which I get and I respect and I understand, but I do think it's probably not the right reason. It should be, this is a problem that I hate that it exists. This problem shouldn't exist. I'm capable of fixing it. I'm going to fix it. That's the mentality that the best founders that I've met have, where they know what they can do.
So if you're someone who wants to be a founder, even though it's not necessarily the best approach, the one thing they should do is look for that problem. Your number one step, if you want to be a founder, look around, dig around in your hobbies, your interests, whatever. Find a problem instead of finding a team and just trying to make, the solution. Just find the problem. Would you say that's the one thing that people should look into if they want to be a founder?
100%. Like, I think the best founders are subject matter experts who have found or lived a problem and know it better than anyone else. Because at the end of the day, I could go and theoretically build software for, I don't know, let's say like complex women's health. Theoretically, I could probably do that, but it's not going to be anywhere near as good as a, female founder who has lived that experience and understands it because they've had to go through the complex systems and seen the failings, or a medical professional who has worked in that system and has that understanding. Like, I think there's levels of expertise and experience that will always layer to have a better ultimate product. And I think I would be as far removed from that problem as anyone could be by virtue of just being a generic, straight white dude, completely removed from that system, never having worked in the medical field. In the same way that if I was to build a system for venture capital investment operations, I'm probably the right profile of person to be able to do that better than
Because
the
you've
vast
lived through
majority
it.
of others.
Yeah.
And so I think there is this lens of, don't just build whatever because you feel like building something and you want to be a founder. Find what you have a unique expertise and experience in. What is the thing that you can build and understand better than 99% of people? Because especially now, we're seeing that there is an increased availability of technology. There is a reduced barrier to entry at scale through the kind of improvement of AI coding tools, where, look, you might not be getting something enterprise grade out of Claude Code in a dream if you don't know what you're doing. But you also can get pretty close. You can get an MVP, you can get enough to get funding, you can hire a team. You can, in theory, get good enough to build your own, even if you don't come from a software engineering background, and be able to build up a product that's functional. I think that that really does mean that the future is less about, and again, caveating specifically for more generic technologies that most people have exposure to, it is then more about the team themselves and their experience and their ability to sell, their go-to-market strategy, their unique understanding of the problem, than it is about the technology itself. Because the reality is that they're going to know what features need to be built better. They're going to know what are the actual pain points that will drive decision makers. They're going to have the networks within a space that they can go out and sell to. It is really hard to get out into a market that you don't know, that you don't have exposure to, and sell a product, because it's probably not that good a product. It's probably not solving the needs that they actually have. It's probably based on research that you've done, secondhand accounts. And that's not to say that you can't do that and be incredibly successful. I'm sure there's plenty of founders that could do it better than I could in my own expertise areas. But I think there is a level of understanding that you get from being in a space and being an expert and experiencing that pain, that means that whatever you build will be better because you're solving something you genuinely care about and understand, and you'll have more defensibility because of it.
We go back to the whole balance between building and validation. And the more you've lived the problem, the more you're ready to do the building. But if you don't have the validation part personally, put an emphasis on the validation even more. Although, even if you've lived, and here I'm connecting past, present, and future. I'm sending to episode 3 that we recorded. This one's already out, where we received a woman health founder who's been through the problem herself. But even because of that, she thought, oh, the validation is done. And very early, she realized, wait a minute, that's my point of view about the problem. So this is a little caveat there. Even if you know the problem, check that you're not just an exception to the rule, or that everyone around is also experiencing it the way that you do, because maybe they experience it differently, and there are different ways of experiencing a problem. And that was one of the big learnings she got, was even if you know the industry, even if you know the problems, even if you've lived through that, still validate. It's never something to underestimate. So yeah, that was the little caveat I wanted to bring here. And so that was the past connecting to present, and connected to the future. We will also have another women's health startup on the show. I think today we're recording episode 17 and they will be 21. So I'm just teasing that for the future. But if you want to know more about women's health, there's those 2 that are coming up. So thank you for putting an emphasis on these points. I'm just conscious of time. We've already covered a lot of things about your learnings, and that's very nice. We haven't really touched about what you're doing today as an investor. So you mentioned you work with Black Nova VC. You are a VC who are working in B2B tech. Do you do B2B SaaS as well or not?
Yeah. So when the fund was originally set up, it was a B2B SaaS fund. So I think the first fund, that was the original framing. Ironically enough, there was still a mix of hardware and software in there as well. I think as we're seeing technology evolve, we get further and further away from being any one model. Like, I think SaaS as well just had such a attribution to it because it's such a great pricing model. It makes sense. People started using it as a substitute for software in general and for technology. Whereas I think we're seeing now, there is more and more terrible software that is being pumped out and just sold to companies that don't necessarily know what to look for. And there are bugs, and there's privacy issues and security, and there's a million and one different things. But also it is becoming more and more commoditized. And the way that we are seeing some businesses not tackle that defensibility problem of how do you build something that is durable is through that mix of hardware and software. So We don't go as often into pure play hardware. We have, but it's probably not the key focus area just because we have less exposure to it. But hardware and software mixes are becoming consistently more common in our portfolio.
Gotcha.
And I think there is a real play in that defensibility and that data aggregation and that being present physically in the business environment that allows you to capture information, become embedded into their workflows and systems, that really creates a massive value and also allows you to be a better product, again, through that capture of unique data that you are building out. You're part of the process. You understand even the layouts of their sites, whatever it might be. There's so many different factors that can be built upon by adding that hardware element. But I would also then caution against being a software hardware mix just because you think, oh, well, if we plug some random hardware and it doesn't really add value, it looks better. It is very much often these businesses require the hardware to be able to function the way they do as opposed to being an add-on.
I see. I think that exceptionally we might skip our usual format of yes, no, this, that, because there's so many other things I want to talk about. And of course, I'm conscious of your time. But I'll implement all of the questions I wanted to ask in that segment into the rest of the episode. I'm slowly transitioning to the Australian ecosystem. Let's use Black Nova as an entrance point here. So you mentioned Black Nova. Maybe just tell us a bit more. We started with the investment thesis. Tell us a bit more. What's your stage of investment? Are you investing at the moment? That was one of the questions we mentioned earlier. And maybe what makes Black Nova unique compared to the Australian ecosystem and what makes it a typical Australian VC, and then we'll move to the Australian part.
Yeah, sounds good. So from the perspective of Black Nova, like I said, we're a B2B technology fund. We focus primarily on companies selling into mid-market and enterprise customer bases.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because that's where our founders are built. So Matt and Darcy built multiple businesses. Matt has built 2 of the top 50 enterprise technology companies to come out of Australia, I believe. And so had the exposure, the networks, and the understanding of what it takes to build those businesses that gives us kind of a better way of being able to assess and also to support with the introductions. We lead, I would say, probably 80% of the deals that we do. We targeted leading 50%, but there is not a lot of conviction leads early stages in pre-seed and seed in Australia. And so we find ourselves taking the lead role in more deals than we thought, but we're happy to do so because we get to set the terms. And I think we have pretty founder-friendly terms. We've got a pretty good system. Like most of our deals are fairly similar in terms of their structure, so it makes it a little bit easier. And we also have a great lawyer, shout out to Harry, who is very on the ball and works very hard. So thank you, Harry. And it just makes our process a lot smoother. And in terms of the stages, where ideally as early as possible. So we want to be, if we can, the first investor or meaningful investor into a business. We come in at pre-seed, seed. In some cases, we'll come in at a light Series A entry, but the preference is definitely earlier rather than later, because that's where, 1, we can make sure that we're getting the right meaningful stakes in the business, and 2, where we can provide as much value as possible. Like the later you enter the business, the more the systems are established, the more the problems are compounded, the harder it is to be able to break those chains of behaviors that probably aren't going to be helpful long term. Whereas if we get in as early as we can really genuinely lean in and help solve so many more of their problems and prevent a lot of the problems that will come up later if, they don't get the right steers.
So before we jump into what makes it different from Australian to typically Australian, I just want to bounce back on this. You mentioned earlier that you have a particular model where your partners are incentivized to be operational, which increases the value of the companies. One of the things that we've been tackling a lot in the episodes of this podcast is investors talking about the VC model as it is, just a check for a check, being broken, and the issue in management fees being a burden, or should I say something that restrains funds in deploying more support. There needs to be an innovation. The 220 model isn't enough. They can't really tap into more resources because otherwise they need to make even bigger exits. The math isn't just math. So people, some investors innovate in how they can support the companies without having that strain issue of the management fees. Would you say that, sharing the carry with more partners, and what are the incentives that make you a unique fund that has the capacity to operationalize your experience and your support without touching to the management fees versus other funds that might struggle with it?
Yeah, I think this is such an interesting topic, and I think that it's a funny one because I have my strong opinions in this as well. I think there are a lot of funds that answer that by increasing their fund size every time they raise a fund. So you'll see them go out with a fund that's $20 million. It's like, great. And then they raise another fund, which is $50 million. And you go, okay, that's still within reason. Then they go and raise a $300 million fund. And you go, what unit economics are you playing with? And then you've got funds in Australia that are have up to $1 billion under management. And you look at that, and then you look at the Australian ecosystem and you say, okay, you need a $8 billion plus outcome for this business to be worth investing in for the way that your fund operates. How many of those have come out of Australia? Definitely a great number. Like, we have the highest per capita dollar invested unicorn rate, but we're still talking about quite a low overall number, which means their hit rate has to be incredible. And the math doesn't make sense for large scale funds of that size, but I think they're doing it because they need the management fee. And in some cases, that's because they're getting fat on the management fee and taking as much money from their investors as they can. And I think that's, I don't believe that's the right way to do this job, but there are definitely funds out there that do. And then the other side of that is by operationalizing it. Like, there's a lot of funds that are on that larger size that I've worked with that I think are great because they do use that money to try and build out systems and approaches and make the portfolio better and lean in and have better ways of engaging with the community and supporting the community. Like, I think there's great ways to use that management fee when they do it, but more often than not, it's not utilized well. So the flip side of that is, if you're a small fund, you really need to stretch that fee. And that's where, like, for us, we're a 2 and 20 model. We have a team of 5 full-time staff. We have 3 operating partners who are kind of part-time, 1-2 days a week. And then we have the 23 venture partners, so including the operating partners, 26, who are investors in the fund or incentivized through carry or both. And they are effectively an extension of our team. So by using our carry, so our investors aren't paying more for it, we're effectively accepting that an allocation of our carry should be going to them for the value they provide. We are able to be a team of, closer to 30 than a team of 5 that we would normally be operating on. I also think there's a lot that people could be doing with AI and automation that they're not. Like, I don't think most VC funds are run well operationally, not necessarily because the teams are capable, but because, there's embedded processes. Some funds have been around for a really long way and it's hard to get them to change their ways. I think a lot of VCs act less like startups than they should in being able to pivot and move and adjust. And I also think that a lot of this technology is new and untested and people are a little bit scared of playing around with it in the same way that you'll see enterprise customers kind of dipping their toe in and out and in and out. So I think there's this kind of disconnect between people that see and invest in the most innovative technologies in the world, but don't use them, which I find very interesting. We've tried to be on the other side of that, which is building everything as safely and securely as we can, but also using AI to automate tasks that don't need a human to do them anymore, to use automation processes, to build out code stacks that will allow us to operationalize things that really don't need team. And so we probably won't need to hire again, or if we do, it'll be a very specific type of role. Because we have AI agents running in the background doing all of the admin that we don't need to do. Anything that isn't secure data that needs to be locked down, we can build out our own on-premises agents when we do need to do that type of work. There is so much that you can do now that allows you to operate 10 times more efficiently that I think a lot of funds should be, but are currently not doing, or they're in the very early stages of starting to play around with it. And frankly, I hope they don't, because it's great that we've got an edge, but I am sure that starts to change over the near future.
So just concretely, when you're still a 220 model, but the way, when you say the LPs are paying higher for the partners, can you explain exactly, like, in terms of capital allocation, how does that work? Who gets more of what, like, how do you make this work where others can't? What was the specific model?
So the LPs are paying more, we are paying. So the partners of the fund and our allocation, we're effectively giving an allocation from that budget to our venture partners. So out of our 20%, that is allocated out to venture partners as well. So they will get a share in that. And again, it's success incentivization. So they're incentivized to work hard, because if our fund doesn't do well, they've gotten nothing out of the time that they've given to us. So there is a real incentive for them. And as I mentioned as well, many of them are investors in the fund as well. So they have their additional incentives there, but it allows them to get real exposure and be able to actually get their hands dirty and lean in and support. And a large number of our investors are actually exited founders and people within the operator ecosystem. So it also helps that we have quite a wide bench of people that do want to lean in and support.
What's your stance on, because it's funny, it's a little bit when you have a company and sometimes founders don't want to dilute their capital and give it away to non-executive directors that are a little bit like venture partners incentivized to their carry. You're saying, well, if you have a bit of equity, they can work for the company. And more often than not, I hear founders saying that unfortunately, unless you pay someone cash, they don't do anything. Even if they have the equity, it's like, well, if the company works well, I'll take the equity. If it doesn't, I didn't lose anything. So they're not really incentivized. how is it? Is it similar what you're doing? Like, how do you juggle between paying someone to do something versus not paying them but putting an incentive? Like, I feel like there's some similarities between founder NED and VC and other venture partners, so not necessarily GPs, but other partners. How do you compare those, and how do you make sure that the incentive is enough, but not too much, and that they actually do the work?
Yeah, it's a great question. And look, without going too deep into the operational processes and things, and I'm not sure what they're comfortable sharing externally or not, but from our side of things, like we have Noga in our team. So she's one of our operating partners. She effectively manages the venture partner system. So she is keeping on top of who is doing what, who's been allocated. Are we giving them enough? Are we giving them too much? So we kind of monitor what are the outputs. And then again, we've operationalized a lot of systems where we get them to send an email or a transcript or whatever it might be of notes. Whenever they meet with portfolio companies the AI can pull out, extract all the information, categorize it. We can have run sheets of who's doing what when. So we get a lot of visibility, and we're trying to kind of expand that out to make sure that we can make sure that we are allocating things accurately and giving people the time and support they need. But I think there's also a piece of it that is, these are people who have been on the founder journey. They've done it before. They're excited to get to do it again to some other capacity, but they're also busy people. So we are asking for a lot. We're asking for kind of 1 day a week or less. And in that, it equates to being able to lean in and support companies that are in their interest areas, that they're experts in, that, these are founders that are coming to them with genuinely interesting technology and questions. I think because of that structure, we found that most people are pretty keen to lean in. And if they're not, then we would have that conversation with them of, is this a capacity issue or is this just you're no longer interested? And if they're not, then great. They're welcome to leave the venture partner pool or have that conversation if, it just doesn't make sense for them to be there anymore.
Gotcha.
In the majority of cases, I think we've got a really strong bench that are just there, that care, that want to lean in and support. And to be honest, I think the incentive is probably less about the financial aspect of the carry and more about getting to be involved in some really great companies.
So it's less about how it's structured, but who you're selecting and who they are deep down. Like, do they want to help or not? To be fair, I have a little bit with the same with the podcast. There's many really knowledgeable people out there, but whether they're willing or not to share it really affects the quality of an episode, or just whether they want to come on an episode or not. So far, I've only had really good ones, and it's also part of, we prepared this. We had an informal chat before this. We knew each other even before that, but even with someone I do a cold outreach towards, the fact that they reply yes or no, or they just even reply, is already an indicator of, do they want to share their information? Do they want to share some of their time? And if you like to select either an NED or a venture partner with that model, you have to make sure, like, hey, is that something that you want to do? And the incentive is just a bonus rather than, it's not a driving force. It's a bonus, really. It's a way to say, thank you for giving your time. Let me give back. It's not, this should be the argument for them to come in. Now, let's focus the rest of this episode on the Australian niche. Let's open this door to this wonderful island that has a lot of great opportunities, but as we all know, has a lot of dangerous and venomous and whatever mythical, nearly mythical beasts that can be very scary. So what makes Australia the wonderful sandy, sunny beaches where you can go surfing, and as a founder, maybe ride some of the great waves and opportunities there, versus what are the scorpions and jellyfishes and whatever crazy spiders you have that founders need to be aware about when they want to dabble in the Australian ecosystem. Tell us more about the pros and cons, how to navigate both as a founder and a VC.
Yeah, look, there's a bunch of different things. So I think we are unique. As I said before, we have, again, I think this is still accurate, the highest number of unicorns per dollar invested, scale to kind of GDP and scale. And so we have an incredible ecosystem. We have a really educated population. We have a lot of amazing people building here, and also a lot of amazing people that move here because they want to live in a beautiful area. And we're lucky to have an incredible landscape and lifestyle. And I think that's amazing. I also think there is some really strong incentives that have been built up that allow founders to do well and that allow investors to invest in our ecosystem more effectively. One of those is ESVCLP. So ESVCLP, it's a regime that was kind of brought into place in Australia to encourage investment. And effectively, it's a tax return compliance. It's a specialist tax treatment that incentivizes people to invest in venture capital funds or similar investors. And they receive an exemption on taxation on returns to a certain extent and a carry forward tax offset. So without getting too technical in all those things and going beyond my accounting knowledge and understanding, effectively it is one of the last kind of tax-free or CGT-free types of investment. And it means that there is a real incentive for investors to put their money into the innovation ecosystem. And then on the other side of that for founders is the R&D tax incentive, which is a research and development tax incentive, where the money that you are spending on your research and development for your business, you can then claim 43.5%, I believe that's still the number, back on your taxes for the business at the end of the period. And there are also facilities to get loans from corporations who can do R&D tax incentive loans, where if, for example, you can't wait till the end of that period where you get that loan, where you get that incentive back, you can actually get a loan out against that and then be able to pay that loan off when you get the R&D tax incentive payment. So that's not to say that I recommend or don't recommend that. I have no strong opinions there. I think it's a useful mechanism for the founders.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not something that we as a fund are providing. We're very much a venture capital fund. We don't do kind of the more loan side of things unless it's specifically a short-term loan to help a founder bridge a specific cash flow issue for whatever reason. And again, that's more on an ad hoc, oh, they needed help so we can kind of sort something out for them as opposed to actually being a loan. But yeah, effectively those kind of structures allow companies to go a little bit further than they otherwise would. So if you think about the raise terms in Australia, typically a company will raise less at a lower valuation in Australia than they would in the US, just by virtue of available capital. But the flip side to that is their money will go further here because they have incredibly high quality engineering talent, but they will be able to get that 43.5% tax offset, which then allows them to kind of bring that money back in. So your cost of build and cost of research and development and growth is substantially lower in the end result than it would be if you were to do it in a different location.
I think in the UK, there's the similar thing with you R&D tax credits. I think Portugal does something similar with this feed as well, but this might be closer to the ESVCLP. So ESVCLP, early stage venture partnership limited roles. Is that the right nomenclature?
Yeah.
Right. So ESVCLP is what incentivizes funds to invest in Australia.
Yeah. So that is correct. So that's probably a good point to touch on that I should go more in depth with. So with ESVCLP, for us to be a fund that gets that benefit, we have to invest 80% of our capital into businesses that are based in Australia for the year of the investment. And so if we're investing in companies that are based over in the US and that makes up more than 20% of our investments, we actually don't get that incentive. So different when companies are based here and then they eventually move over, that's fine. Again, if you're investing in them while they're Australian. But for new investments that we're making, we're actively looking to do those primarily in companies based in Australia for about 80%. That does leave 20% allocation for businesses overseas. So we do make investments that are based here, but there is heavy incentives for Australian funds who are ESVCLP funds to prioritize Australian businesses. So a tip to any founders that are looking to raise money from Australian funds is, if you're not based in Australia, it's worth looking at whether or not they are an ESVCLP fund. If they're not, fine, doesn't make a difference for them. If they are, then you will probably want to kind of put that question to them to understand what is your remaining allocation for businesses that aren't based in Australia? And is this something that you're still comfortable with? Because they could, in theory, be talking to you knowing that they can't really make that investment. So it's similar to ghost funds that aren't deploying capital. It's worth understanding how real is what they're saying to you.
Right. So that's basically the incentive when a fund goes to raise funding to LPs, because it affects the carry, and so it affects the carry for the GPs, but also affects the 80% that goes back to the LPs, right?
Yeah. So effectively it changes the tax. So you will then need to pay more taxes on it if you're not an ESVCLP fund.
All right. Perfect. So that's the above stage, and then it goes slightly below. There's also the ESIC, which is a bit like SEIS and EIS in the UK, for those who know, which is if you invest in companies that have this status, then you get a tax rebate of the equivalent of a percentage of your investment. So tell us a bit more about the ESIC, how you can qualify, how you cannot qualify, and the incidence of if whether you're a business or a VC, how you juggle with this thing.
Yeah, so ESIC is slightly different for us. It's more so for kind of the company and angel investor side than it is for ESVCLP funds. So ESVCLP is the funds, VC funds kind of setup. Whereas ESIC is more like an angel investor. So if you're ESIC and you're buying new shares in a company that qualifies for the ESIC investment, you basically get a tax refund that you can carry forward. So a tax offset that is about 20% of the amount that you're paying for your investment. which caps out at about $200,000. Although again, don't quote me on that because I am
Gotcha.
not a tax
Okay.
expert and I'm less involved in the ESIC.
No worries.
But effectively, it's a similar-ish kind of structure in that it is giving a tax incentive to investors who then are more likely to make angel investments because they get a tax offset.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
de-risks it and minimizes the need of the returns. The returns can be slightly lower because they're getting a better benefit for their dollar.
I see. Are there ESIC funds? I know that in the UK they have SEIS funds where angels, like the fund is basically an SPV of different angels that benefit from the SEIS, and they're called SEIS fund because it acts like a fund. Is it the same with ESIC where angels can get together in a syndicate that's kind of an SPV, acts as a fund, and they have like ESIC funds? Or is that not a thing at all?
Yeah, it depends on how the syndicates are structured, but I believe so. So there are angel syndicates that are active in Australia. There's a number of them. There's some really great angel funds that we work with, or angel syndicates that we work with. And it is more so down to how they're structured. So very much an organizational structure question. But in theory, yes, there are angel syndicates that would be able to get access to ESIC credits for their investors.
Now let's conclude this whole episode with Australia as a market. You know, I'm a company. I am aware of ESVCLP. I'm aware of ESIC, and I still want to dabble into Australia. I think it's still worth it. Or I do believe that it can be worth it. What are the main things I need to be aware of if I'm an American, a European, whatever, founder, or even investor? What do I need to worry about in the Australian ecosystem? What are maybe consumer habits, industry habits, good practice things that I need to be aware about that will define whether is the right market for me, whether it's worth investing money, maybe to create a branch there, so that if I have a branch there, we get the ESVCLP money, etc. What makes Australia a good place to be? Or in the other sense, why would you not recommend Australia and be like, yeah, there's those incentives, but maybe they're not made for you specifically?
It's a great question. So I love Australia. Feel very lucky to live here. We are a very small country in terms of our population. I think we have currently 28-ish, 29 million people. Okay. And we are one of the largest land masses. So that population is distributed. Less distributed, it's a lot on the coast and a lot in kind of similar areas, but we are small cities that are very geographically spread out, and there's a lot of land being used. That makes it really hard if you're building certain types of products. So in the way that if you're building a product in London, you can target a, fairly compressed geographical location very easily. The same is not the case in Australia. Like we have a handful of cities where there's a lot of people living there, but many of them are out in the suburbs. In Sydney, there's a lot of my friends that have to commute an hour in every day, and that's still kind of considered semi-normal for those people because they're living so much further out. So be aware that there is geographic and structural differences to Australia than to a lot of other places by virtue of just large landmass and very distributed. So if you're, for example, building something like, I think Milk Run is a good example of this, where it's, a grocery delivery system through bikes, that's so much harder to do in Australia because you are going to be riding a lot further to get to the right markets and to get to different people. And the landscape is very different to being in a smaller city, a more condensed city where there's high populations in kind of more stacked environments. So I think there are structural pieces. I think the other things that are worth kind of speaking to as well are we are quite reliant on external trade for a lot of things. Like again, by virtue of being a smaller country, we do a lot of trade. And so there is a kind of relationship that we have with a number of different countries where we're exporting in and out. So I think there's less resistance to buying non-Australian products.
Okay.
But again, it depends on the area. So we have pushes to buy more Australian products from the government. We have our sovereign risk and concerns. But it can be a little bit easier to sell to Australians as a non-Australian than I think I've seen a lot of founders experience the other way, where if they're trying to sell to Americans and they're not over in America, boots on the ground, they will really struggle. I think there are Australian businesses that really have had to physically make that move to be able to succeed. Whereas I think there is also a market here for foreign owned and operated businesses because it is the norm in a smaller country with a kind of less large successful businesses that are based here.
I see. Now, to conclude this episode, I think we had a good idea of your background. There's many things we couldn't talk about, unfortunately, your whole time with Antlers and Associate, the whole venture builder part, but we talked a lot about venture builders in other episodes. So if you want to learn more about Josh's experience, please check his LinkedIn. Everything's written there. If you want to reach out to him, I'm sure that you'll be happy to answer some questions. But there are also many other episodes about venture builders, about other experiences that are similar to what Josh has done. If we had 2 hours, we could span this out. But Josh, thank you so much for giving us a little peep into the Australian ecosystem, into your career, into the learnings. I think this is really the most interesting thing, is taking those learnings and sharing them with people. In a way, that's kind of how the fund, that's how Back Nova is constructed, is being able to take the learnings of those ex-operators, ex-founders, exited founders, and taking that and putting it into companies to make them more successful, because that's essentially the bet, is we're taking less of the carry because we're giving a little bit away, but we're taking the bet that it is going to bring the value even higher. And although you share the cake more, it will be a bigger cake to share. And in the end, you'll find yourself having the same, if not more, than those who don't. So it was really interesting to hear about this innovation. Also innovation within the VC. I love that you're saying VCs need to believe like, or to behave like startups. They're the same. For me, a VC is a startup. You have a thesis, that's your product. You're raising funds the same way many startups will. It's harder for a VC to be self-funded. Otherwise, you're basically just an angel or a family office. But there are a lot of very similar dynamics, and you need to be on top of your game. And that's one thing that I think this podcast is a lot for founders, but I try to make it also for VCs. The learnings there is, you need to be on top of your game. There needs to be innovation in the VC space. And I'm really, really glad that you mentioned those things. So yeah, do you have any last words, any last recommendation, or any cool projects you're working on, any cool industries or types of companies you're looking for? What keeps you up at night? What's your dream startup to invest in? Things you're looking into actively at the moment? Just any last words, please share that with us.
I'll throw a couple of things. So one last recommendation to startups: when you're looking at investors, look at the funds they have under management. So understand the size of that fund, and then use that to understand whether or not your business is going to be a meaningful contributor. So what I mean by that is, if you were going and speaking to a fund that is a $20 million fund, and you think that your business can get big enough to sell for $500 million, that's a great outcome for a $20 million fund. If they get 10%, let's say, this probably wouldn't happen with dilution and everything, but let's say they have 10% by reinvesting, and at the end of the business, they've got their 10%.
Yeah.
They're getting $50 million back. They have 2.5x their fund. That's a great outcome. That's a huge win for them. All their investors getting their money back. They've got a great return. That's an awesome story at $500 million. If you are taking money from a $1 billion fund and you sell for $500 million and they've got 10%, $50 million doesn't touch the sides. They aren't returning their money to their investors. They aren't making any meaningful contributions back. They're not getting their incentives. If they're hurdled, they're not even getting their carry in theory. So it's important to also then recognize, okay, does my business's reasonable and realistic aspirations align with what this fund needs to be able to return their fund? And if not, be aware that they might not be the best investor for you. So there is a case where that, $1 billion fund might look at your business and realize, well, they'll get to $300 million, but it's not really enough for us. We're going to stop putting a ton of resources into it. They're fine. They'll get to what they get to, but they're not a priority because they're not one of the big returners. Whereas that same $20 million fund would go hard into this business and support and introductions and effort because they see that this is something that can return for them. So I don't think that's the right way of thinking about it for the investors, but I think it is very often the way they do. And so it's very important for you as a founder to say, what do I realistically but optimistically believe my business is capable of being at a scale? And is an investor going to be able to return their fund to their investors off the back of a share of that business? And if not, what is their comfort level and what are the incentives that they have to be helping support this business growing? So I think that's a piece of advice for founders. In terms of the types of businesses that we look at and that I'm excited by, I think I am personally playing with all of the different AI tools. I am spending a lot of sleepless nights. I've become a bit of a Claude zombie vampire kind of thing as well. So I think anything that is playing in that space of, okay, these tools are great. This is really interesting. What makes things work? What are the, picks and shovels? What are the things that are facilitating these businesses actually being able to operate? How are we, capitalizing on this new innovative piece of technology that is the next wave of industrial revolution or beyond? I mean, we didn't even really talk about that side of things. Again, if we had 2 hours, I wish, but there is an incredible emergence of technology, but there is a huge gap in corporates being able to adopt it, in the privacy and security being sufficient to be able to use it. in the infrastructure, being able to operate at a sufficient capacity to be able to allow us to use it at scale. Like, I think if we stop developing new models today and everything stay exactly as it is from a model perspective, the AI only gets better, we would still be able to massively increase the productivity and usage of it by improving all of the millions of structures that support it in a dramatic way. But right now, we are still struggling to keep pace with the technologies that evolves. I think we're going to see more and more of that enablement technology becoming meaningful and powerful and impactful. And I think that's an area that I'm really excited by whenever I see companies building in that space. Because like, okay, you're thinking about this beyond the flashy, sexy, oh, let's develop a new layer for a model or whatever else. It's okay, how do we make this work? How do we turn this into something real and usable and concrete instead of a, fantastical technology of the future? Let's make this a impactful technology right now and today. So that's probably my last other point there.
Do you think this is, at some point I was talking to someone about AI and the improvement of models, and they were saying, well, the operationalization of AI is essentially what agents came to fill in. Well, there's a great capacity. Now there is thinking and there's doing. And it feels like what you're saying is going on the doing side, and it goes with what you're doing with your fund. You have a lot of agents doing some of the stuff. So it's great to have the data. It's great to have the knowledge. It's great to have the power, the capacity. Now let's turn into actually operationalizing it. And so all of the technology that allows this bridging is going to be the next step in this revolution. The thing is, it's happening so quickly. Everything is going so fast that it's hard to keep up the pace. And there's been so much done here, and now we have to go there. It's exciting. It's an exciting time for sure. And I'm sure we would have many, many more hours to discuss this. Maybe an episode 2 one day, who knows? But yeah, I don't want to tease things too early, but for sure it would be really interesting to talk about this and also other bits of your career. In any way, Josh, thank you so much. I think this has been genuinely one of the most insightful episodes. It was great about the Australia bit because that's brand new, but there's a lot of things you mentioned that apply to everything else. So it was a nice holistic vision on investing, and I hope that both for founders and also for investors, this episode was really helpful. For everyone out there listening, if you were on Spotify, you want to see our beautiful faces, as always, you can check this out on YouTube. If you want to share some of the highlights and learnings of this episode in a more digestible, quick, fast edited format, we will be posted those on our Instagram and our YouTube channel. And for any of the other learnings, we are also doing that on LinkedIn and on our repository website, where you can find all of the key learnings, like how do you make the right team and find the right founder, or how is it that you should invest, and think about the fund size to company outcome fit. This product market fit, and I think that's another fit that we discussed about. You will find everything about there with the timestamps, with the transcripts, and hopefully get all of the wisdom of all of our guests in one spot. Josh, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll hear you soon, probably. Keep in touch.
That's good. Thank you again, my friend.
Cheers. All right. Bye-bye, mate.